sooner or later be felt here and all across the West. But for tonight, on day 3 of the Israel-Hamas war, we'll be bringing you all the latest and considering what might happen next. Of course, events in Israel have eclipsed those in Liverpool at the Labour Party conference today, but Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves has set out her vision for the economy under Labour, promising securenomics, which sounds a bit like an 80s pop band. So what would a Starmer government mean for the pound in your pocket? And with one NHS trust promising a year off on full pay for men undergoing the andropause, that's the male menopause, have we become a nation of complete hypochondriacs? All of that to come tonight on Dewbs & Co. With me, Bev Turner. But first, the latest news headlines with Polly.
Bev, thank you. And at 6 o'clock, our top story is that the United Nations says Israel's order of a complete siege on Gaza is deeply distressing. The country's declared war on Hamas after the terrorist group launched an attack on Saturday. More than 800 people are reported to have been killed inside Israel and 500 others in Gaza since then. Well, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has urged all parties to allow humanitarian aid in to help trapped Palestinians.
The humanitarian situation in Gaza was extremely dire before these hostilities. Now it will only deteriorate exponentially. Medical equipment, food, fuel and other humanitarian supplies are desperately needed, along with access for humanitarian personnel. Relief and entry of essential supplies into Gaza must be facilitated, and the UN will continue efforts to provide aid to respond to these needs. And I urge all sides and the relevant parties to allow United Nations access to deliver urgent humanitarian assistance to Palestinian civilians trapped and helpless in the Gaza Strip.
Chief speaking a short time ago. Well, Scotland's First Minister says his wife's parents are still trapped in Gaza after visiting family. Humza Yousaf, who unequivocally condemned Hamas's attack, says he's not sure if they'll make it through the night. And here the Foreign Secretary says the government will review its support to Israel and to British nationals in the country. Speaking after a Cobra meeting today, James Cleverly said Hamas's attack was unprecedented.
We reaffirmed our support to Israel in its self-defense against this terrorist attack perpetrated by Hamas against unarmed civilians in many instances. I've been speaking with foreign ministers from around the region and beyond. The Prime Minister has engaged with the Israeli Prime Minister and will be engaging with our allies. This is an ongoing situation, and of course we will be reviewing our support to Israel and of course British nationals in Israel as the situation progresses.
Well, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, said the Labour Party views attacks on Israel as utterly appalling.
There is never a justification for terrorism. Labour stands firmly in support of Israel's right to defend itself, rescue hostages and protect its citizens. The hostages so cruelly taken, including children, should be released immediately, and Hamas's indiscriminate attacks set back the cause of peace.
Well, that was inside the hall. Outside the hall, pro-Palestinian demonstrations were held. A group of protesters heard chanting "Free Palestine," some clashing with Labour Party members. The Shadow Chancellor said her party is ready to rebuild Britain. Speaking at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool, Rachel Reeves spoke of a restoring of economic security after what she called the chaos of the Tory years. She said Labour's plans to revamp the UK's local town planning departments were being planned in order to boost the economy. She also confirmed her ideas about overhauling planning rules to speed up energy and 5G projects. She said the choice at the next general election for the electorate was 5 more years of Tory chaos or a changed Labour Party.
Of the wreckage of Tory misrule, Labour will restore our economic credibility. We will lift our living standards, make work pay, rebuild our public services, invest in homegrown industries in every corner of our country, and together we will get Britain its future back.
Well, away from conference today, the government's defending its plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda in the Supreme Court. Lawyers representing the Home Office told the court that the policy to remove people to a country that is safe but less attractive than the UK is lawful. Sir James Eadie says the government has attached considerable importance to the deal. Over 3 days, several cases collectively known as the Rwanda Appeals will challenge the Court of Appeal's decision to halt resettling migrants. More than 400 criminals have been jailed for a total of over 3,700 years after an operation by the Metropolitan Police. Operation Eternal investigated organised crime groups over a 3.5-year period by targeting an encrypted messaging platform. More than 3 tons of Class A and B drugs and nearly 50 weapons were seized in the largest ever operation of its kind by the Met, with the force calling it unprecedented. That's the latest news. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Thank you, Polly. So welcome to Dewbs & Co this evening with me, Bev Turner, joining me until 7 o'clock this evening, my panel, PR consultant Alex Dean and political commentator Joe Phillips. You can get in touch with us this evening, of course, usual email address gbviews@gbnews.com, or on Twitter, or X, as he wants us to call it. I'm not calling it that yet, Alex, are you?
No, I'm not.
No.
Still tweeting
Joe,
away.
I'm not. Still Twitter, @GB News. So get in touch with us this evening. So we're in day 3 of the Israel-Hamas war. Rishi Sunak has held an emergency COBRA meeting this afternoon after over 1,300 people have died so far in the conflict. Labour conference is, of course, in full swing as well today. Joe, let me come to you first of all. Just how do you reflect on this amount of barbarity and death and violence against completely innocent people?
Well, it's just unbelievable, and as many commentators have said, this is their September the 11th moment, because it is unprecedented. There are many, many questions that need to be answered in due course, which is why the big one is, why did Israel, which is renowned for its security, its intelligence service, its embedded informants in Gaza, how did this happen without it? I mean, there are reports that they were warned by Egypt. That's running on the news this evening, which the Israeli government, or Prime Minister Netanyahu, has dismissed. But this has got ramifications for all of us. You know, there are questions about Iran's involvement. We know that Iran has supported financially and with weapons. They support Hamas, the terror group. They also support Hezbollah in Lebanon. There are questions about the tentacles of Russia and how far they go. And of course, you know, you are talking, Bev, as we all know, too sadly, about the most unstable area in the world. And the ramifications, you know, across that. Egypt's got elections coming up later this year. You know, you've got Syria still in the midst of its civil war. You've got Jordan, which has always played peace broker. But it's, you know, it's the end of the two-state solution and anything that's been agreed over the years, and it is just horrific.
And you wonder, Alex, we've spent so much time in the last 12 months thinking about Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah.
We've kind of taken our eyes off the Middle East, and it seemed as though the situation in Israel was relatively quiet, relatively speaking. Why now, do you think?
I think there are 2 reasons. The first is it wasn't quiet in terms of domestic politics. In fact, it was quite fiery and disrupted. And Netanyahu's attempted judicial reforms had led to widespread discontent within the democratic and pluralist state of Israel. People had voiced real concerns on sort of civil liberties grounds about their government's direction of travel. Some had said they would no longer serve as reservists. That is to say, I think they sent a signal to those who hate them that they were internally divided and internally focused and inwardly focused. And that meant that those around them got the impression that now was the right time to strike. So that's part one. Part two is that Israel has been on a push, both for genuine desire for peace and concern about Iran's position in the region to improve its relations with its neighbours. So we've seen Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, all normalise relations with Israel, and then the big one, potentially, Saudi Arabia, in discussions with normalising their position with Israel. And that would have sent a real message in the region. So seeing that happen, Hamas, I think, thinking it was the best possible time to strike against Israel, and in a state of some desperation as their support base narrowed to Iran and Iran alone, thought it's now or never. But there is one sliver of positivity about this disgusting episode, which is that indicates to me that Hamas is desperate rather than in a position of strength.
You think Hamas is desperate rather than in a position of strength? But they must have felt that they were in a position of strength on Saturday morning to enact such an invasion is the only word. I mean,
yeah, that's exactly what it was.
You had the music concert with all of these just beautiful young people at a peace conference.
You couldn't be more right.
And they arrived by paraglider, Joe. It's
awful.
It's just awful.
And they arrived by paraglider and in trucks, and they machine-gunned innocent people there for a good time. It's one of those singular reminders that Israel is the country in which people, if they're gay, can enjoy themselves, whatever kind of music they're in, rather than only having one chant they're allowed, they can sing, no death penalty and so forth. It's a country where people can be themselves, and then hated for being themselves, people have gone and killed them.
Yeah, but I think your point, Beverly, which is quite interesting, that you said, about Moscow and thinking that, we've taken our eyes off the Middle East. Now, there might be people out there who think that this would quite help Moscow because it's taken our eyes off Ukraine, because we're all focused on the Middle East for, it's going to have huge geopolitical and diplomatic ramifications.
And that's before we even start talking about oil. Gas.
Yes.
And the energy crisis that we're already feeling the effects of in this country. This is only going to make that much worse as we go into the winter, Joe.
But also, at the end, the people who are suffering, whether they're Palestinians or they're Israelis, they are ordinary people. They are kids. Like you say, they're kids at a peace concert having a rave in the desert. They are people in their houses, and it is always the civilians who get caught up in this. And, we know about the numbers of deaths, but there are an awful lot more people who will be seriously injured.
I was interviewing a journalist, a citizen journalist, Alex, on the TV this morning on GBNews, Efrat Fenixson, and I asked her a question. Are Israelis fleeing? Is everybody racing to the airport?
They're not.
Well, this is what was interesting, and somebody on Twitter said that was a very naive question of me, and yes, I think I would hold my hands up. It is a naive question.
Visitors have left in droves, but the Israelis are digging in. It is their home. They say that they're going to stand up for themselves and they're not going to be driven out. And, one fully understands that position. I wanted to answer the point you were talking to Joe about oil. It does make one think, what are we doing, allowing ourselves to be dependent on a scenario in which Hamas can disrupt our energy supply?
Absolutely.
I think, without being party political, this informs my view about whether or not we should renew leases in the North Sea.
Yeah.
It makes me think to myself, why on earth aren't we approving more nuclear? We should be more energy sufficient and energy sovereign ourselves. Because if you allow terrorists like this to disrupt our way of life, not even with an attack on the UK, but simply with an attack on somebody else, you've got to think we've got the mix wrong.
It pulls all sorts of things into focus,
doesn't it?
This situation now, doesn't it? Like we said, like I said in my opening, I think we will look back on this as one of the most significant weeks in modern history, and it might sound like an exaggeration, but I think we haven't begun to see what the implications of events of the last 3 days are going to be. Let's have a listen to what David Lammy said today. He was talking at the Labour Party conference. This is what he said. It was unequivocal.
Labour utterly condemns Hamas's appalling attack on Israel. Labour stands firmly in support of Israel's right to defend itself, rescue hostages and protect its citizens. There will not be a just and lasting peace until Israel is secure, Palestine is a sovereign state, and both Israelis and Palestinians enjoy security, dignity and human rights.
That was David Lammy, of course, Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs of the United Kingdom. It's a very long title. Shadow, sorry. Thank you. Yeah, we're not quite there yet, Alex. A good point.
We may never be.
He'd like to think so. Well, we may never be. I thought that was a really great, emphatic,
Absolutely,
unequivocal
Absolutely.
Condemnation
Yes.
of Hamas.
Yes, and, you know, there is no doubt that there are factions within the Labour Party who would seek to cause disruption. And, you know, if Jeremy Corbyn was still the leader, then they wouldn't be in the position they're now.
And there was a fringe event there today, Joe, at which Hamas were applauded at the conference. Is there a space for that?
Shameful, but they're not in charge, and we must pay... it's not a time for party politics, really. I must say, as a Conservative, I'm immensely impressed by the Labour Party this week. I'm immensely impressed by the way that those attitudes and those positions are entirely on the fringe and outside the conference, protesting it rather than inside it. They're not on the platform. And I thought David Lammy was tremendous today. You know, whilst he doesn't have my votes himself as a Labour person and I'm a Tory, he shows that he's got the maturity and ability to be our Foreign Secretary. And he's demonstrative of the fact that this Labour Party has transformed itself and have taken a mature position on a vital issue like this. Well done, Labour.
It seems trite, Joe, to say that the conference has been overshadowed by events in the Middle East.
But it's true.
But it is true.
And, you know, Beverly, I worked on political conferences for many, many years, and, you know, these things happen, global events, and you've worked so hard on your presentations, your backdrop, your speeches and everything, and then, you know, you're not on the front pages, you know, for the worst of possible reasons. And so I think, you know, I think what Alex said is absolutely right and very generous as well. You know, it's about dignity, it's about getting on with what you've got to do, saying the right things that need to be said, which I think David Lammy did, and certainly Rachel Reeves in her media rounds this morning. And I think they still get on with the job.
And yet we still have the BBC, who the style book does not refer to Hamas as a terrorist organisation. How is that?
I don't understand that, because they are a prescribed organisation under the Terrorism Act. So I'm not entirely sure why.
I'm sure they'll update it.
I'm sure they will.
I would have thought, as we
feel
speak,
they should have done it some time ago.
Someone will hopefully be editing that. Let's look at some of the numbers. If you're just joining us, obviously a horrendous day. Israel has hit back very hard at Gaza. The death toll now over 1,300 people. At least 800 Israelis and 560 Palestinians have been killed. Retaliation has only just begun, said Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu. Thousands of Hamas targets have been hit, says the Israeli military. The Israeli Air Force has carried out one of the largest ever airstrikes against Hamas in Gaza. The other issue, Alex, that we can't neglect is the kidnapping. So there have been over 100 innocent civilians.
How you would feel if
kidnapped.
your family members were in that situation. And there are people left wondering if their family members are alive. And if they are, how they are being treated. We've seen the footage of people being seized off the streets and brutalised. There's much footage that is not fit for public consumption that has been circulated to you. Women abused in the most base way alongside the corpses of their friends.
Weaponising of rape.
Correct. And Hamas has said that it will treat its prisoners very well. Well, forgive me if I don't believe that. And I think if you were an Israeli or indeed somebody else snatched through a case of mistaken identity, when you hoover up people off the streets, you may not get the people you mean to. You will be terrified for the fates of your loved ones tonight.
I mentioned earlier there was a Cobra meeting this afternoon hosted by Rishi Sunak. Lynn Owens, the Deputy Commissioner of the Met Police, was seen leaving the Cabinet Office following that meeting. What do we do now, Joe, as the British government? What do we want them to do? Obviously, the priority has to be, I suppose, getting out British citizens.
Yes, and the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, there was a clip earlier after that meeting that he said, you know, there are flights available. The Foreign Office is advising, you know, obviously not to go to Israel unless it's absolutely urgent. But I think, you know, what you can do is what the government has done, which is absolutely unequivocal support for Israel to defend itself against a terrorist attack. And I think you have to talk to other world leaders because it's, you know, this isn't something that little England can do on its own. It's far too big.
Do you feel safe with Rishi Sunak in charge during a situation like this, Alex? And do you feel safe with Biden? being at the helm?
I certainly respect and admire Rishi Sunak's leadership, and I think he's got a better grip on what's going on than some others may do. But your Biden point, I think, is well made. But I wanted to answer your point about what should we do. There is another thing we should be doing, which is protecting our own Jewish people. In Golders Green and other areas of the United Kingdom, which are heavily Jewish, we've seen shops vandalised, we've seen abusive signs, and it seems that if Israel does something people don't like, the react is hatred towards our Jews. And if Israel is treated in a despicable way and its people violated, then the reaction is hatred towards our British Jews.
And
there is no winning here.
And we've seen people on the streets of Britain today. There was
Celebrating.
a young woman celebrating with a microphone, saying this is
absolutely
a success.
appalling.
I find that mind-boggling.
But it's, you know, again, because Hamas is a prescribed group, that is illegal.
Yeah. Well, let's see. It is, like we say, only day 3, but no doubt the reverberations of this will be felt for many, many months, if not years to come. We are only just starting this conversation. Right, Labour conference is in full swing. Will they win your vote? We'll tell you what they said today. Don't go anywhere.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
And Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Bev Turner, this week. Thank you for keeping me company. I'm here until 7 o'clock with PR consultant Alex Dean and political commentator Joe Phillips. So, do you wish you'd been at the conference today, both of you?
Do you know what, Beverly? I have done more conferences over the last 30-something years. I'm very happy to never see the inside of a conference hall.
Alex,
Those awful hotel rooms.
For the first time in my life, having seen David Lammy speak today, I do wish I'd been at Labour Party conference.
Do you?
I do. I would have liked to have been there and seen what I regard as a transformative moment in our opposition party's life.
Well, extraordinary, Alex
I mean, I
Dean.
have to say they have improved. You know, gone are the days of... I remember going to one conference in Blackpool years and years ago and, you know, staying in those dreadful B&Bs where you had to pay a 50p deposit for the plug in order to use
to put the plug in the sink.
I like the Blackpool B&B. I love a Blackpool B&B.
Yeah.
Right, let's go to GB News political correspondent Olivia Utley, who is in Liverpool for a rundown of the day's events. Good evening, Olivia.
Good evening, Bev.
So what have been the highlights today on Monday?
Well, I think we can safely say that Rachel Reeves's speech was the big highlight. Whatever you make of Reeves, whatever you make of Labour in general, it was a pretty barnstorming speech. And the energy in the room, I was there, and it was just worlds away from anything that happened at the Conservative Party conference last week. I think there were 7 standing ovations, and the overspill of people who couldn't even get a seat in a very, very large room was enormous. Now, Reeves sort of took on, she definitely stole the Tory clothes in lots of ways. She talked a lot about taxation, saying that she would like to lower taxation. Well, obviously that is normally a pretty conservative outlook, but now the Conservatives have lumbered Britain with the highest tax burden in 70 years. So it could well be that there are plenty of swing voters at home who listen to Rachel Reeves perhaps on GB News Radio tomorrow morning and think, hey, perhaps she has a point. It was notable actually how little there was of new policy information from Rachel Reeves's speech. She talked about a genuine living wage, national British railways, all things that she's mentioned before. There wasn't very much there in terms of sort of nuggets of news. But that didn't really matter. She had the energy, she had the momentum with her. And in lots of ways, that was pretty reminiscent of Blair. She was a total sort of central Tory. She had all of her colleagues behind her, standing up, clapping her, etc. But notably, the big difference from Blair was there was very little of anything ideological at all. There was no talk of a sort of vision for the country. There was no talk of a new day dawning. It was all about, well, who's more competent, me or the Conservatives? The main message I got from her speech was Labour will clear up Tory messes. Is your life any better under the Conservatives than it was 13 years ago when they took office? She thinks, no, it wasn't. And that will probably chime with quite a lot of people throughout the country. She talks about cracking down on waste. Well, there's nothing really ideological about that. And no one could really disagree that it would be good to get back some of that money that was fraudulently claimed during the pandemic. So nothing very ideological, but I think on the whole that didn't matter. She had the room with her, and I think she might well have the country with her.
And what about the mood, Olivia? Does it look like a party that presumes as long as they don't upset anybody too dramatically, they will win the next election? Or are they just being a little complacent, do you think?
Well, I think they do. It does feel as though they think they are going to win the next election. Lisa Nandy said at a Fringe event today that she's expecting more than 2 terms in office. I think Labour have, on the whole, been briefed not to sound too complacent, but that message was generally missed by her. A lot of people have said, and I am feeling that today, that it's a sort of reassuringly boring conference. We've seen so many conference dramas in recent years. If you remember Theresa May coughing her way through the speech, the P45 coming up, etc., etc. Today has felt very, very slick. It's felt like Labour is very much in charge. I've seen sort of lots of public affairs officials running around, lobbyists trying to talk to Labour because they feel as though Labour is now the party of government.
And Olivia, let me just...
So yes, I would say there's some complacency.
One last quick question. Obviously, I was down in Manchester, up in Manchester for the Conservative Party conference last week. GB News had a big presence there. We also have a similar presence in Liverpool, not quite as big as last week. How are they greeting GB News? Are they nice to you? Did you and Tom Harwood get any warm hugs from the Labour Party today?
Well, actually, I was quite surprised at how friendly, on the whole, Labour delegates have been.
Good.
I've been voxing Labour delegates all day on the atrocities going on in Israel. And I was first interested to see that almost everyone I talked to was very much on the side of David Lammy. They pretty much all said that they stand completely behind Israel, and we're very happy to talk to GB News about it, which
Good
is
to know.
Reassuring for us.
Good to know. Well, you've got your posh frock on, Olivia. You look beautiful. She's obviously going out to a bit of a do, Alex. The kind of do that you would like to be
swanky
at.
parties that Labour now puts on.
You know what? Should we have a little look at Rachel Reeves and speaking today? I mean, it was very kind of her also that for them to choose a GB News branded backdrop. Have a look.
Out of the wreckage of Tory misrule, Labour will restore our economic credibility. We will lift our living standards, make work pay, rebuild our public services, invest in homegrown industries in every corner of our country, and together we will get Britain its future back.
It wasn't flashy, Jo, but I thought she did a great job. I thought the fact that she was wearing the dark colour, I thought was appropriate on
Fabulous
a day like
hair.
today. Great hair. If you're listening on the radio, very slick, shiny black bob. Not that it matters. We wouldn't talk about the men in that way, but in a way, you know, she looked the part, didn't she? And I thought there was a lot of word salad. As Olivia said, there weren't huge revelations in there. The kind of the chorus of her speech was Labour is ready to serve, ready to lead, and ready to rebuild Britain. It wasn't quite Build Back Better, but it was almost that, wasn't it? But what did you make of it? Do you think she did a good job?
Yes, I think she did a great job, and I think the endorsement she got from Mark Carney, the former Governor of the Bank of England, who, of course, was appointed by George Osborne, Tory Chancellor, I think is hugely important. I mean, you know, one of the things about being in opposition for 13 years means that you have an awful lot of time to hone your message. And I think, as Alex said earlier, the Labour Party has transformed itself from the dreadful days of Jeremy Corbyn, you know, and boring isn't always bad. I think, you know, we'll see what Keir Starmer says later on in the week, and we'll see what other speakers have got to say. They have to offer something that is not necessarily, you know, motherhood and apple pie or sunlit uplands, but they've got to do more than say, we're better than the current lot. There's got to be something for people to believe in.
Yeah, well, she talks about her securonomics, Alex, which sounds a bit like an 80s pop band to me, the securonomics.
Yeah, you can hear the synth pop as you say.
Can't you? But it's also, there was something a little bit sort of patrician about it that makes me uncomfortable. I don't need them to make, I don't want them to look after me. Just let me make my money, keep as much of it as I can, and give me the securonomics. We're going to keep you safe. That always makes me a bit icky.
I think it's a deliberate echo of Bidenomics, which misses the fact in the parallel that the dollar as the reserve currency, that plays a world role, and Biden can afford to splurge on infrastructure in a way that the British economy can't, which Labour has realised by at least postponing, not abandoning, but postponing its Green Deal. You know, they've talked about this 28 billion, and it cost them politically to set that back, and it was a realistic thing which demonstrated they're really thinking about government. But having been so nice about the Labour Party, let's just remember this. Rachel Reeves says, Olivia tells us, that they think they will win. Well, so did Neil Kinnock, and on more than one occasion. And it's possible to get these things wrong.
Absolutely.
And I want to just point out that people say that Labour played it ultra-cautious under Blair and Brown going into the 97 election. But Gordon Brown, as Shadow Chancellor, took a transformative minimum wage and a 10p in the pound income tax rate. Rachel Reeves has given you actually, literally nothing of substance.
Well, this is what she did say. She said, I'm going to crack down on Tory ministers' private jet habit, which is quite clever to say the Tory ministers' private jet habit, because then if Labour also take private jets, you can say, well, I only said I was going to crack it down.
I did stop the Tories,
I stopped the Tories doing it.
I think the thing that she did say, which I think will resonate with a lot of members of the public, is the COVID clawback, because there are many, many millions of people who feel absolutely disgusted that people who made a lot of money ripping us, the public, off. 7.2
billion pounds of COVID fraud, Jo. 2% of the fraudulent grants have been recovered.
And Rishi Sunak said he wasn't even going to bother to pursue it. And you sort of think, well, I'm sure people watching and listening will have been pursued to the nth degree for
an unpaid
underpayment
TV licence or something.
TV licence or council tax or something like that. It is absolutely despicable that has not been a priority.
That's the COVID Corruption Commission.
No, but
what bugs me, just what bugs me about that, where were Labour when they were dishing out? All they were asking for was more furlough, more grants.
They would say, and it's not my role to speak for Labour by any means, but they would say, yes, we wanted more spent, but we assumed it would be spent appropriately and that fraud would be clamped down on. My position on that, because you'll see lots of business people today saying, as if it's very wise, but you see, you failed to consider the costs of pursuing it, and you've got to balance the one against the other, and pragmatically, perhaps it's not worth the candle. My view is, I don't give a damn how much it costs to catch these fraudsters.
Yeah, absolutely.
If it costs twice as much to go and prosecute them and try and get the money back that we lost, I'd rather do that and send a message you never rip Britain off again than let them get away with it.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, there are many, many questions which will obviously come out in Baroness Hallett's COVID inquiry. But, you know, the fast-track VIP channels from Matt Hancock's pub landlord
Absolutely.
mate.
There's a lot of appetite for some sort of justice on that, I think whichever side of the political debate you sit on. Right, we're going to have more about the Labour Party conference next. Don't go anywhere. This is Dewbs and...
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, this is Dewbs & Co with me, Bev Turner, this evening, while Michelle takes a well-earned holiday. You've been getting in touch at home and, do you know, you've been saying lovely things. It's such a difficult conversation talking about the Israeli situation. It's so inflammatory on so many sides, and actually you've all been incredibly complimentary. Mike has said, I must send a message to say Bev and her team on Israel have been spot on. The summary by Alex Dean was superb. Explanation, clarity, description, a fine, clear summary of the situation. Thanks as well to Joe. Great amidst the most awful of circumstances. I couldn't agree more. And well, on you two being brilliant, not on me.
Thank
just
you very
to be just to be clear, when they said it was you two tonight, I breathed a sigh of relief. I said, well, none of us are Middle East political experts. Let's be honest, but this is a massive, massive event in the last 3 days. And in terms of the Labour Party conference, Terry has said, can we tie down all these promises that Labour are making? They're saying they're going to rebuild Britain. How long is it going to take? What's the timeline? Where's the fictitious non-dom money coming from? And how long will it last if it dries up? What's the plan? And that's because Rachel Reeves said today she wouldn't allow non-dom status. If you live here, you have to pay your tax.
Our tax take will go down significantly if the government pursues that, because people who have ultra-high net worth are very fleet of foot, and they make their decisions, at least in part, based on what they have to pay. And people say, oh, there's all sorts of cultural issues that keep people here. Yeah, up to a point, Lord Cropper.
Yes, but Institute of Fiscal Studies reckon that even if 100 people... Because it's a very small number of people, but with a large amount of money. But even if 100 of the, let's say, 300-400 people who would fall into that category left the country, you would still raise a significant amount. I mean, you know, they are sort of spending it many times over.
Yeah.
But I think it's about message, it's about nuance, it's about this sense of the Tories looking after their mates, being wealthy, you know, the richest Prime Minister that's...
It's an easy win, isn't it?
But I think, you know, Rachel Reeves, because she's an economist, because she's got that background with the Bank of England, and people take her seriously in business and the world of economics, I think, you know, it has a little bit more resonance than it just coming out.
You're right, she has immense credibility in that area. A lot of you are saying that it was a speech full of style and no substance. Laughable, says Jean, to consider that Labour will improve the country's finances. Look at Wales. Look at London. Vote Labour, lose the use of your car and have your council tax doubled. Now, it was a speech of social class today, actually. And as you were saying, Joe, it's very easy to play that particularly emotive card quite quickly because Rishi Sunak's family are so rich. And there's an interesting poll that's just come out which shows that working class people who were a key part of the coalition of voters that delivered the Conservatives that 2019 general election are saying that they're deserting the Conservative Party in droves, and only 44% of working class voters who voted for the Tories would now back them. That's damning.
I have just two-part response. The first is I think the Labour Party is quite ill-advised to have a go at people's backgrounds, especially with this most diverse cabinet in history.
Yeah.
And I think people make the mistake of just looking at what they think the size of somebody's wallet is, rather than thinking about what their background is and where they've come from. And if you look at the cohort of Sunak and the people who are around him and may or may not be the next leaders of the Conservative Party, it's an incredibly diverse group, from Badenoch to Braverman to Cleverly, Sunak himself and so forth. And of course,
all privately educated?
I don't know.
And they are.
No, I don't think Kemi Badenoch was, actually, but it doesn't... And I'm not sure Sue Ellen was. Well, look, let's make it clear. I wasn't, right? And I still think it's a mistake to have a go at people's putting their kids into...
You were.
Well, that's... is that a compliment or not? I don't know in the current world. Anyway, so that was part one.
I wasn't either, by the way.
Sure, I think having a go at people's backgrounds is a mistake, and a lot of people think to themselves, that's actually a bit below the belt. But the second thing about this Labour Party's approach, and your point about seeking to attract the working class vote, people may currently be disenchanted with the state of play. It doesn't necessarily mean their vote goes to the Labour Party.
They're not.
Which is what your polling is showing.
But this is what's so interesting about the poll, Joe, is that they're going to vote for reform, for reclaim.
Or not bother.
Or not bother.
And that's a real worry. I mean,
these smaller parties, which I think could cause significant...
I think it's, you know, and as we said before, we all remember Neil Kinnock, you know, the Sheffield rally when everybody thought it was in the bag, and of course it wasn't, and John Major surprised everybody by winning that 1992 election.
Yep.
So Labour is very well aware, and there is a lot of discipline in the Labour Party now under Keir Starmer, that, you know, this is not about complacently. It is theirs to lose, but anything can happen between
Just
now and the
remind
next
us what
year.
happened with the Kinnock.
Kinnock did a massive rally in Sheffield where he repeated, "We're all right." It was a weird cry. We're all right.
But it was at the time he made the speech about militant in Liverpool.
A Labour council, a Labour council, sending people in taxis to hand out their redundancy notices, and it was a great speech.
So he was taking on
the hard
Eric
left.
Hatton. who is the leader of Liverpool Council and Merseyside, and it was utter chaos. And, you know, the city was imploding. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, back in Liverpool today? But
yeah.
And he did, and, you know, Neil Kinnock is and was a great orator.
Sure.
But he... You know, they assumed they were going to win.
But so if we boil it down now, your point would be about people not being less than certain they will vote the way they did last time.
Yes.
The point is that if you look at polling now, it doesn't actually show, despite how well Starmer is doing in the polls, some surge of new belief in Starmer as a leader. Indeed, he and the Prime Minister are sort of neck and neck, and sometimes the Prime Minister is ahead of him. And what it shows is that people's a big swell in don't know.
Yeah.
And the don't knows are made up wildly disproportionately of people who voted Tory last time.
Yeah.
Which means the challenge for the Tory party is hard, but it's identifiable. Win back your own vote.
But do you know what's fascinating is that after the conference last week, Rishi Sunak did not get a bounce in the polls.
No, he didn't.
Which would be incredibly disappointing too.
Well, I think,
and there's
you know,
some questions to be asked as to why. But we've got to move on. I think we need to take a break. We can ask those. We'll answer those questions.
Sure.
We've got to take another quick break. Don't go anywhere. After this quick break, the male menopause. Alex is getting a bit of a flush. You're getting a bit of a hot flush here. Apparently, you can take a year off work, full paid, with one NHS trust. And this isn't a trans issue. This is men. So, are we medicalising what is basically life's vicissitudes, our emotions? Don't go anywhere.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good Good evening. Thank you for joining me while I keep the chair warm for Michelle. She's on holiday this week. Dewbs & Co with me, Bev Turner, Alex Dean and Joe Phillips, thankfully, are still here. Right, now, this is one of those stories that you just have to pause and think this can't be true. Well, this is an NHS trust that is now recognising the male menopause. It is a clinical condition, apparently, when men's testosterone levels drop. But now these paramedics within this trust are being offered a year on full pay, Joe, for the male menopause. What's happened to us?
Well, that's not strictly true. They are entitled to sick pay, and they would still have to presumably go to their doctor or get, put sick notes or whatever.
Sick pay?
Yes. Well, I mean, you and I, Bev, as women, would think this is ridiculous. We might also think, actually, if men had period pains, childbirth, endometriosis and all the other things,
they'd be
we'd
making
never
the
have
most
those.
of it.
Well, or we'd have found cures and pain relief a lot earlier than we're having to put up with. But I think...
Typical, talking about me whilst I'm here. If I'm not here.
How's your womb? How's your womb, Alex?
Yeah.
How are your menopausal symptoms?
Don't you worry your pretty little head about it. It's girls' talk. But I think this is it's a wider issue, isn't it? It's about the medicalisation of things that... Yeah, feelings, I suppose.
Yeah.
And this sense that everything has... which isn't to denigrate very real symptoms and very real mental health issues.
And beyond this one trust, it's been true in dozens of pieces of guidance in prisons and in educational establishments and in hospitals that the menopause should be recognised, which is, of course, ridiculous because in order to suffer the menopause, you need to stop menstruating.
Yeah.
To stop menstruating, you needed to have menstruated to start with, which men can't do, which just demonstrates completely ridiculous.
OK, so this is about when testosterone levels reduce in men, which used to be called a midlife crisis,
quite.
Alex. This would normally be when you go and get
Go
a
out and buy a fast car.
motorbike, a tattoo and possibly a younger girlfriend.
Yeah, exactly.
But what we're now doing is we're pathologising this stage of life and giving it a medical definition, which is brilliant for pharmaceutical companies.
So when you take the stages, you medicalise it first and then weaponise it and say, well, you can no longer judge me for my absurd behaviour because I'm going through the menopause. You suddenly mean that what we once would have said to somebody, pull yourself together, perhaps look in the mirror, perhaps a one stiff drink, go to bed, wake up tomorrow, shave and go to work. Instead, we this is terribly sorry, I'm very sympathetic, lots of therapy for you and no blame attached, as you take up to a year off work. Absurd.
Well, I think we need to look at how we deal with the normal feelings of anxiety and nerves.
Because we use this word crisis, Joe, all the time. Everything's a blooming crisis, isn't it? But we are in a mental health crisis at the moment.
And for sure, there are people out there who are really, really suffering, and we've already had...
Long-term sick.
Yes, but it's unfashionable.
2.6 million people in this country are off long-term
I know, unfashionably enough, as far as I know, I have no mental health conditions currently, but, it's only a matter of time before we're all medicalised, and indeed, thinking you don't have any problems is probably a problem in and of itself.
What do you make of this then, Joe? So the public sector average sick days is 10.6 days.
Good grief.
Private sector average sick days is 5.8. It's half in the private sector.
It's not really surprising,
Civil
is it?
service.
Well, it's easier,
to take time off, you mean?
Yes,
because
and maybe in the private sector, it's smaller organisations and things like that. I mean, there are very many genuine reasons, and mental health is a genuine issue for many people. It is also a crisis for hospitals and the police, who quite often have to deal with it. And I think this report from the NHS Confederation talks about people with mental health episodes waiting up to 50 hours in A&E. And there is a shortage of mental health specialists. But we are, as you say, in huge danger of medical... We started this programme talking about Israel and the horror of what's going on there. Yeah. We haven't even mentioned 2,000 people dead in Afghanistan. Those are real things.
That's with the earthquakes.
That's what's going on in Ukraine. We need to slightly get a grip.
Yes, this is part of the issue, though, isn't it, Alex? Is that we do have a safe existence, and we have a sort of spiritual vacuum, let's call it, to some extent. And
in the absence of life problems, people create some for themselves.
Thank you.
And it's worth looking abroad and seeing where people have real problems, realising how lucky we are, and then getting on with it.
But why is it so unfashionable to say the pull yourself together thing. Pull yourself together because, you know, Joe, when I think if I'm having a rough day or the kids are winding me up or my co-presenter's winding me up, you know, I think about what I could do to make me happy and I go for a swim or I go for a walk.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yes, and we're lucky that we're able to do that. You know, we're fit enough and we've got access to it. You know, I'm very lucky I swim every day.
Do you?
Yes.
That's your thing as well,
Yeah,
is
I
it?
love swimming. It's my meditation. But, you know, I've also got access to fresh air. I love gardening. Lots of people don't have those things for whatever reasons. They're either living in appalling housing or they've got too many pressures around them. I mean, you know, there are people dealing with looking after elderly relatives
parents,
and
young
things
children.
like that.
Absolutely.
And all of those things. But there are, you know, and it is for every self-help book that sells that then gets into a remainder shop or into the Oxfam bookshop. They are the little things.
And I'm thinking about, it is a little bit, but I'm thinking particularly about the younger generation, you know, the teenagers, the young 20s who will go to the doctor to say, I'm
They've
depressed.
been told all the time to be worried. And if you're told from the time you're very small to be worried all the time, guess what? You worry.
Right. Alex Dean, Joe Phillips, thank you for helping me through my first evening of the week. I will be back on GB News with Britain's Newsroom tomorrow morning at 9:30 with Andrew Pearce. But up next, it's Nigel Farage. Have a lovely evening. I'll see you first thing in the morning, and then I'll be back here on Wednesday evening, and I will carry through the rest of the week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Have a good one.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. We'll see some patchy low cloud and fog developing, particularly across southern parts of England and Wales, but further heavy rain pushing into Scotland. That's courtesy of weather fronts pushing through over the next few days. This weather front, a dividing line between warm air to the south and colder air trying to come into the north by the middle of the week. We've already got that cloud and rain spilling into parts of Northern Ireland, pushing into western Scotland as we move through this evening into the early hours. Elsewhere, turning quite grey. There'll be some mist and low cloud developing by the end of the night, particularly across southwestern parts of the UK. And fairly mild temperatures for all staying up in double figures. So it's a wet start across Scotland to start Tuesday morning. Outbreaks of heavy rain, which will continue to push slowly southeastwards through the day here. So we could see some further flooding issues. Brightening up across parts of England and Wales. Some low cloud, though, lingering across southern counties. Plenty of hazy sunshine here, lifting temperatures to around 23 or 24. Turning increasingly windy across the northern half of the UK as weather fronts push in. Those weather fronts slowly push their way southwards into Wednesday, turning heavy at times, particularly across parts of Wales. Further north, brighter, sunny spells and scattered showers, particularly across northwest Scotland. Some of these heavy at times, quite muggy across southern parts of the UK under that cloud and rain. A bit fresher further north and turning cooler as we head towards the weekend.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.